Butterflies and moths, bees and wasps, beetles, mosquitoes, and flies and fleas. These are all insects who are born as larvae. Most we find gross, some quite fun. But what exactly are they? Larvae and their metamorphoses are absent from about 20% of insect species alive today. In fact, before larvae wriggled their way into existence about 300 million years ago, all insects were simply born as smaller, wingless versions of the adult. And so there is a far deeper, far more nutritious definition to this interesting mystery than merely larvae are baby insects. Where did larvae and their whole complex transformation sequence come from? What did larvae look like before they became larvae? How and why did this form start to appear? We've grouped all possible life cycles of an insect into three main categories. The oldest and rarest form still around today is called ametaboly. These include the silverfish, for instance. Yes, they do exist outside of Minecraft too. Like all other insects and the crustaceans that they originally evolved from, silverfish have a big problem. Unlike us, who have a hard inner skeleton that grows slowly along with our soft outer body, their soft inner body is surrounded by a hard outer skeleton that cannot grow. This limitation means that while growing, all creatures with an exoskeleton will soon reach the limits of its stretch and need to break out of it. A new, soft exoskeleton grows underneath that will be revealed when an insect sheds its old one. It can briefly stretch to fit the new size before it hardens due to a reaction with oxygen. Depending on the thickness and the composition of the proteins within, it can cure into the flexibility of a plastic bag or become tough like a shell. Silverfish are born as smaller versions of the adult, albeit without their genitals and reproductive features. There is a lot of growing and developing to do before they can get to that part. These fresh new insects are called nymphs. With every molt, they quite literally go up a clothing size, until one finally grows in a set of functional genitals to start making new silverfish. There is no limit to how often they molt afterwards, and the adult will continue to grow bigger the rest of its life. From insect ancestors who probably looked quite similar to silverfish, wings evolved. It's a very fascinating story that is best reserved for another video, but why this happened should be clear. It is a very useful adaptation that lets them fly around and spread further, flee from foes, frighten them, discover a lover, and place eggs in newer places. But wings are complex and easily damaged. They're hard to make and not useful enough to grow before the creature flapping them is ready to reproduce. A wing is an extension of the outer exoskeleton, so a molt would quite literally clip their wings. And so this type of life cycle, shared by creatures like grasshoppers, cockroaches, cicadas, and dragonflies, is more clearly separated into a before and an after wings. We say the insects are hemimetabolous, because they undergo half a metamorphosis. Like silverfish, they are born as nymphs, who need to molt several times. After they enter their final nymphal stage, their wings grow underneath their skin to an adult size, which are released and inflated when that last skin is shed. And that's it. This is all the growth this insect gets, because becoming any larger would necessitate a shed. Okay, fine. The mayfly gets to shed once more, but the wings stay on during. From this system, a third type of life cycle evolved that takes the stark separation between phases to the absolute extreme, and it will bring them pretty close to world domination. The third, and by far most common categories of insects, are holometabolists. They undergo a whole metamorphosis. They are born looking like a completely different species compared to the adult. We've been fascinated by this phenomenon for as long as we can remember, and even the ancient Greeks were theorizing about metamorphosis. Aristotle proposed that a caterpillar is a prematurely hatched embryonic butterfly that eventually crawls back into a second egg. Larvae look and move more like a kind of worm. Most of us have read or gotten a finger stuck in one of humanity's most influential pieces of literature, and so we know they are very, very hungry. From the moment they try to exit their egg, all they do is consume. Larval bodies are fully adapted to make the most out of any food source. Caterpillars use their extra legs to hold onto the leaves that they devour. Beetle grubs use powerful jaws to dig and eat wood, roots, seeds, and sometimes polystyrene. Instead of a head, Fly maggots have only a suctioning tube with 2 small teeth to use as ice picks, helped along by the small hooked claws around their entire body that grip onto and tear apart rotting organic material. The aquatic mosquito larva eats submerged algae, hanging upside down at the water surface with only their butt to breathe through. Eusocial bees and wasps, well, they just get to hang out in their combs with air conditioning and 24/7 room service. Larvae can grow big, fast, and they will need to molt multiple times to accommodate this growth. In some species, their skin may come out with different colors, patterns, or plumage, but what they don't look like is anything similar to what they'll end up becoming. Unlike the simple metamorphosis of the grasshopper, the transition from form A to form B in hollow metabolous insects is an intense restructuring that requires a dedicated phase. The pupa. Once a larva grows big enough, they will go in search of a suitable place to pupate. They may shed one final time and expose a skin layer that will become tougher than any layer they've had so far. They may also bury themselves, or create their own cocoon or nest in anticipation. Worker bees will make a little cap to close off their brood combs. Larvae need that safe space to pupate, because their body will become immobile, and their flesh will turn to goo. Although, not exactly. Contrary to popular belief, larvae don't dissolve completely. The structures that will no longer be used in its old form will be instructed to produce digestive enzymes to fall apart into a nutritious soup. Mainly the skin and most of the muscles and organs tick these boxes, but not all cells get this signal, and not all at once. It is important that most of their nervous system remains intact, although its neurons need heavy modification to install the adult software update. Memories built up by larvae are helpful to keep into adulthood. You can quite literally bully a caterpillar with a smell, and they'll still make sure to avoid it as a butterfly. Metamorphosis is a complicated sequence of modification and regrowth that requires oxygen. This is supplied through small breathing tubes that are also spared from digestion. These tubes extend throughout an insect's body, and they allow air in via a series of holes along their flank and, yes, their butt. But the most important part of the larvae to remain intact are the small clusters of cells called imaginal discs. These little clumps are where the adult version of the legs, wings, antennae, and genitals will begin. They've been around since before they hatched and have slowly been developing underneath the surface, but they can now step it up a few notches with the goo as fuel. Inside its exoskeleton, legs and antennae start to extend. Eyes and brains remodel. Wings and genitals prepare for launch, and maggots finally get their head. The pupa is chewed or cracked open. This can be done sensibly, but yeah, I guess why not do it by inflating your newly acquired head? It's always the same with those flies. The new adult skin comes in soft, of course. Their wings still crumpled up and small, but now they gotta hurry up. Before that exoskeleton has a chance to cure into its final shape from oxygen exposure, those wings need to be inflated with hemolymph. That's the insect's equivalent of blood, and it happens through tiny tubes. Here's another misconception. Many people will tell you that insects inflate their wings using something called meconium instead. People, meconium is poop. It's waste products from metamorphosis, and just like in humans, the poop tubes don't open up into the blood tubes. After some drying and a few clumsy test flaps, the insect should be ready to start spreading their wings and their sperm and eggs around, to start the whole cycle all over again. Whoa, calm down, little buddy. But there is something very unusual about how larvae develop, namely the fact that they don't. A 4-step life cycle like this sure seems weird, but at its core is an underlying pattern that matches the cycle of every other living creature. No matter what, a new generation begins at the smallest size it will ever be, and their first order of business is gaining some weight. Before you can start to make more of yourself, you need to make more of yourself. A bacterium that splits again and again without taking the time to increase its overall mass will just splinter itself to dust. Growing in size is a necessity for all life. To build a body eventually capable of reproducing, you must gather all the right ingredients. Growth tends to go hand in hand with development. In this statement, Growth is an increase in the amount of matter an organism is made of, and development is how that matter gets arranged. It's an increase in complexity. Development dictates what shapes an organism goes through during the course of their life. Although growth and development go hand in hand, it often happens in bursts, and rarely with all body parts at the same pace. And that's where larvae get radical. They develop very little from the moment that they hatch, but there is a hell of a lot of growth. Any development that does happen generally provides them with better tools for more eating or defense. It's towards a more effective form of larva and not adult. It's as though larvae take a side route to focus 100% of its efforts on growing. But eventually, they need to get back on track. Once they've gathered enough supplies, they can rush through all the necessary adult-directed development inside their pupa. And afterwards, none more is needed. The only reason an adult will eat afterwards, if they've even bothered to grow a mouth at all, is to power their genitals and wings to do their things. Broadly speaking, gaining matter, developing that matter into the right arrangement, and then splitting some of that matter off to reproduce are three important processes needed to sustain life. And in no creature do they seem as sharply separated as in holometabolous insects. Each phase is entirely specialized for one particular function, with very little overlap. But are we humans really so different? It's generally frowned upon to call someone's child a larva, even though we all used to crawl around, eat voraciously, and only vaguely resembled an adult. Our bodies and brains grow and develop in size and complexity, while true reproductive development is delayed. We catch up on this during puberty. It's our own fun version of pupation. Hormone levels shift and cause a whole host of physical and mental changes. Interestingly enough, when our bodies change, it's not just done by forming new cells, but by recycling existing ones. It's a hammer and chisel approach. Just like in a pupa, cells are instructed to produce similar digestive enzymes that dissolve them, and their nutrients are absorbed by the cells directly around them. Our bodies just do it with a bit more subtlety. After puberty, a human body is usually ready for reproduction, but here we should more broadly refer to reproductive behavior as any kind of action that an organism makes to continue the existence of itself and its species. In other words, having children is reproduction, but so is taking care of those of others. So is spreading knowledge, volunteering to restore ecosystems, or having a job that keeps our whole complex society on solid foundations. Or at least help keep it somewhat afloat. Compare a bee or wasp hive. Here, only the queen can lay eggs, yet without her non-reproducing workers keeping up the hive, not a single larva would make it to adulthood. Humans aren't bees. But scientifically speaking, we do use the term larva to include things far beyond insects. A tadpole is considered the larva of a frog, for instance. There is no rule when exactly a juvenile creature is different enough to warrant being called a larva, so if someone gets upset that you lovingly call their newborn grub a larva, just tell them words are made up anyway. That'll go down well. Larvae, in this broader sense of the meaning, are extremely common. They are perhaps part of most species' life cycles. The majority of underwater creatures don't look recognizably like their parents when they hatch. This little Sputnik-looking creature becomes an urchin. An 8-armed twitchy flower becomes a jellyfish. This shell with wings becomes a slug with neither. And this spiky fish, the size of a butterfly egg, eventually becomes the ocean's heaviest species of fish, if you ignore sharks. This giant gap in form has emerged because parent and child live very different lives. And they live very different lives because they cannot be born the same size. Small creatures in the ocean will get swept away by the current before they are heavy and strong enough to do much about it. Frogs, being amphibians, need time to develop lungs, and so they usually begin their life by diffusing oxygen from the water instead. While such different habitats pose a challenge, there are some obvious advantages too. Oceanic creatures get spread around without having to spend energy, and they may easily colonize new areas this way, sometimes becoming invasive. Tadpoles can live in small ponds that are seasonally dry, and therefore contain no fish, which let them hide safely underwater. And most importantly, having a different diet and habitat means that the adult and their children aren't forced to share. No cramping together in the only bit of available space and potentially trampling your babies. No adult will eat the food out from under their child's nose, or eat the child from under their own nose. Being separate in space and in lifestyle effectively doubles the amount of potential resources available. Butterflies and caterpillars can live in the same exact field, while hardly ever getting to meet. The butterfly stays at the top and drinks nectar from flowers, while their caterpillar can be munching on that plant's leaves at the base. Separate child and adult forms can therefore be a useful adaptation in some situations. But when having to change from one body form to a radically different one, the resulting lifestyle change can get very awkward and a little squeaky. Metamorphosis is the period between the child and adult phase where radical modifications take place. While the metamorphosis from a tadpole to a frog is pretty extreme, it's not necessarily quick. After a tadpole has developed its 4 legs, it will need about a day or two to transition to land, but it may take about a week or longer for that tail to undergo that familiar cellular dissolution and be reabsorbed by the body. This froglet period is often the most vulnerable time in a frog's life. They have left the camouflage of the water and they can no longer swim as well, but they are still slow and clumsy on land compared to an adult. Holometabolous insects largely solved this problem because they carry a burden that can be put to good use. They have that exoskeleton. While a hard outer layer restricts their growth and puts a hard limit to how big an adult can get, it is able to keep all of their insides together, even when they've been mostly liquefied. This allows them to essentially speedrun through that awkward development period as fast as possible, while hidden away in a safe location until they can come out as a fully capable adult. Neither their child nor their adult phase has to suffer from the transition between them. We have all the information we need to let our understanding of larvae be transformed. We know what role they play in an insect's life, but not yet where they came from. How did the forms of larva and pupa suddenly enter the life cycle out of seemingly nowhere? What did they evolve from? What are larvae, historically speaking? Let's return to our hemimetabolous friends and grab ourselves a grasshopper. A female usually lays her fertilized eggs underground. When her nymphs hatch, they first need to burrow their way to the surface. During the late Carboniferous and early Permian periods around 300 million years ago, just before holometabolous insects evolved from one of their kin, hemimetabolous insects reigned supreme across the planet. As they were the first creatures on land to evolve the ability to fly, they very quickly became extremely widespread, also quite literally wide. They diversified into countless species, but the landscapes and the species around them were evolving too, and new food sources started to become available. Plants evolved wood, seeds, vertebrate animals were climbing onto and leaving rotting corpses further and further away from the water's edge. It's all food, ready to be recycled by creatures big and small, but perhaps few creatures the size of the nymphs were going after it. I know a lot of people like to say that crab is nature's ultimate shape, because everything keeps turning into crabs, which is true, but this only really evolved creatures who already look like lobsters, and it only happened about 17 times. Try worms. Almost every branch of animal life has evolved into a long, thin shape at least once. Carcinization? No. Vermification. Snake is worm. Eel is worm. Millipede is worm. Ferret is worm. Most things we call worms do not come from the same single worm ancestor. Being long and skinny is the ultimate, perfect, most superior form for slithering through a medium on Earth, causing it to evolve hundreds of separate times. And that diggable medium can even be the very food that you're consuming. If the nymphs were worm-shaped, they could dig holes through wood. They could burrow into fruits and seeds. They could roll around in a rotting corpse, letting their skin teeth do the ripping. Maybe eat roots and hide from predators by living and moving underground. I direct your attention again to the grasshoppers. But now we're taking a closer look. Just before they emerge from the soil, they shed out of a thin, transparent layer of skin. During that short time period between hatching from an underground egg and reaching the surface, they have an extra secret bonus stage, and in it, they wriggle like a worm. All insects, all animals really, including you and me, start life round. and we will be worm-shaped for at least some period of our early development. It is inside this embryonic skin layer that the grasshopper nymph develops most of their features. The skin envelops them like a sleeping bag, and they shed out of it during or shortly after hatching. Is this brief stage a short-lived larva? Well, because they have functional adult-like legs underneath, we call them something else, a pro-nymph. But it does show us that at some point in the life of a hemimetabolous insect, there is a phase that could have led to a larva. If long ago a nymph stayed a pro-nymph for a little bit longer, that worm-like form could have been very efficient at eating and hiding. All that is required to set off the formation of such an adaptation is a small variation in timing. Hormones are the molecules that regulate when, what, and where things happen in a living creature. We usually assume that an increase in hormone levels causes an increase in its effect, but sometimes hormones instead apply a brake. Insect development is mainly informed by one such brake, the juvenile hormone. A high juvenile hormone level slows or stops development. It keeps the insect juvenile. Inside a grasshopper egg, the nymph will begin to grow and develop, but hey, cool it on the genitals and wings there. The juvenile hormone level rises and applies its brakes in the tissues that would eventually form those organs. The hormone remains present for now, letting development progress very slowly in the background until it drops away entirely. This drop coincides with their second to last molt, the one into their final nymph. The last bit of development happens underneath that layer of exoskeleton. And when they molt, out comes an insect equipped with all their bells and whistles. So what if that hormonal brake gets applied a little earlier? A holometabolous insect develops along the same route, often starting on a bit of development of the legs and eyes, but its higher juvenile hormone level puts its foot down much earlier. Growth can still happen, but not development. It gets stuck. Instead of molting into a nymph, holometabolous insects benefited from simply molting into bigger and bigger, half-formed embryos. Even a short larval period before molting to a nymph could give a significant boost to survival, and it would cause insects who, by natural variation, have a bit more juvenile hormone to have a higher chance to pass on their genes. But development has to happen eventually. And the more of an insect's growth period is being spent as a larva, the less can be spent as a nymph. All the development gets squished into a shorter and shorter period until only the bare minimum remains, and the nymph's role in the life cycle has to change. And so the nymph became the pupa. Only one single molt is all that remains of a true juvenile phase, the rest subsumed by what is essentially a walking embryo. The pupa itself doesn't need to walk because it doesn't need to feed. It makes its muscles and organs available to grind up and be recycled. The trigger to end the larval stage and start dissolving internals is a drop in juvenile hormone. It's the exact same drop that would enter a nymph into its final stage, when the wings and genitals will develop underneath their skin. It is that skin that is now the pupal exoskeleton. And it's the same enzymes that form the natural chisel of renovation that are now able to get amped up to the extreme. Aristotle's statement from earlier, as is so often the case with him, was mostly wrong, but a little bit right. A larva hatches right on time, but it's developmentally stuck as an embryo. And it doesn't go back into an egg, but it exposes a nymphal exoskeleton to complete its development within. In some creatures, like in bees, the pupal's nymphal nature is really still quite apparent. Metamorphosis in insects has not just evolved once, but twice more independently in hemimetabolous insects. That's how useful larvae are, and that is how powerful the process of natural adaptation is. Holometabolous insect species make up over half of the total diversity of all species described to this day. Trillions of unique individuals are born each day, and trillions are eaten by other creatures, cycling nutrients in almost every ecosystem on Earth and adapting to changes at breakneck speeds. Sure, their larvae's consumptive abilities can be a pest to us sometimes. We've tried using juvenile hormone as an insecticide to stop them from ever going into metamorphosis and eating our crops and reproducing, but it took just a handful of generations for them to evolve complete resistance. Yet despite this resilience, insect populations are collapsing all over the world from a variety of man-made causes that are too severe even for them. We need insects desperately for their role in ecosystems and on our farms, but you can't wish for butterflies when you spray away their larvae. If you enjoyed taking this broader look, you can take more of them by subscribing to this channel, or by supporting me on Patreon. And see you next time, broadly speaking.